Put that coffee down.
I'm not here to waste your time, okay? I certainly hope you're not here to waste mine. So I'm gonna keep this short.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
Most valuable commodity I know of is information. Wouldn't you agree?
Coffee's for closers only.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Behind Your Back podcast with me, Bradley Hartman, founder and CEO of the Behind Your Back Sales Company. On this podcast, we talk about leadership, personal productivity, time management, and the craft of selling in the construction industry. So a few months ago, I got a tip from a friendly acquaintance. That's right, both a friend and an acquaintance that I know in the industry, that I respect. And he sent me a note that largely said, if you know what was good for you, you'd interview this person on the podcast. And when I get tips like this, I often respond. I say, hey, what question should I ask? Got a little bit more feedback, and I will fast forward to the end to tell you about this conversation. I'm so glad I did. I really enjoyed my time talking to upfront as we planned for this call, and then this conversation that you will hear with this individual, and her name is Lawanna Dendy. Lawanna works with US LBM, and she is a director, human resources business partners in their South region. Lawanna and I have a wide-ranging conversation where we talk about why her story is her why and how she grew up in the industry, how she started out as a receptionist, paying her way through school, and then found her way getting her degree from Limestone University, the Saints, and then got her master's at Clemson before continuing on her career, delivering value, building relationships throughout US LBM. Lawanna shares some great insight about the growth mindset. We talk about some innovation in HR, we talk a little bit about mental health and how that is changing things during an era of COVID, and we get into some DEI initiative content about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And she has a 3C framework that I found immensely helpful as I work with our own clients, and we talk about this as the industry as we come to terms with how DEI initiatives can be incorporated throughout, as opposed to something else that is simply bolted on. So without further ado, I'm excited to share my conversation with Miss Lawanna Dendy. As always, thank you for listening. So Miss Lawanna Dendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm thrilled you're here. I think I got about 4 hours worth of questions for us here. We're not going to get to them all, but I really enjoyed learning more about you and talking to you prior to these calls. So finally, we're here. You mentioned something on our first call that really kind of stuck with me and really resonated. You said this phrase, and I'm wondering if you can go into it just a little bit. You said, my story is my why. What does that mean?
Yeah, absolutely. My story is my why because I feel like that I was born into the industry of construction, right? So my father was a mason. He had his own masonry company, and that's all I knew. That's all I ever known is construction, specifically on the masonry side. And I was born in Asheville, North Carolina, and my father was in partnership with a very kind gentleman. And at some point, when I could remember and start recalling things about life, so about when I was a toddler and I can understand, my father and his business partner decided to go their separate ways, right? So his partner kept the North Carolina territory, and my father went and built his territory in South Carolina, which landed me in Greenville, South Carolina, which is where I am today. And it's my why because watching my father over the years, his work ethic, his passion, and during that time, I didn't know much. It provided us a decent living at that time, right? And so just everything that I learned from my father and what he instilled in us from a work ethic goes beyond a degree, right? It was the grit that he taught us about being dedicated and putting your all into something to make something wonderful out of it. That's my why in any and everything that I do.
That's great. And you'd mentioned your brother is also in the building community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. As children of my father, we all had a role in construction. So we all grew up working in the family business. So one of my brothers is now a builder, and he partnered with my father. And really what he did is he took the platform that my father had and it evolved into more than just masonry, right? So now we're building homes and we're making dreams come true. And fun fact is my father is still working now for my brother.
You're kidding. So your father is a subcontractor to your brother.
He is. So it can get real interesting around the office.
Yeah. Net 90, net 180 days. What are the payment terms involved there, you know?
Exactly.
Oh, and I think I was really interested to hear just about your entry specifically into the lumber and building material business. Go into that a little bit.
Yeah. So I started with a company called GBS Building Supply in Greenville, South Carolina. Oh gosh, back in 1996 or 7-ish.
Okay.
And I started as a receptionist. And honestly, when I came in as a receptionist, I literally came in with the mindset that I was going to do the job to help me through college.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was one that was had real firm, clear rules around what adulting looked like. And his was when you graduated from high school, you went to college. If you did not go to college, you worked, right? And so fun fact is I was literally going to school to appease my father because I wasn't sure I was ready to be an adult. And as long as I was in college, you know, he paid my car payment and all this stuff. So I'm glad that later I benefited from both that and the education part. So I started at GBS while I was in school as a receptionist, answering the phone, you know, thank you for calling GBS. How may I direct your call? But the end goal at that time was for me to go on and pursue greener pastures once that was over with. But I am so grateful that when I started at GBS, shortly after I started, because of that work ethic, I took on more of a different mindset than just answering the phone. It was answering the phone and then becoming familiar with the people on the other side of the call. It was answering the phone and to become familiar with the different customers that was calling in and how to connect them to the right salesperson and understanding the things that they needed. And so from that, I caught someone's attention within the organization. We call that mentoring now.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, it was just someone who saw a diamond in the rough and just engaged me. It wasn't a formal process. And that individual took me under their wings and just cultivated me and just helped me see what the talents I had within me that could contribute in this space. And so from there, I went from answering the phones to accounting, accounts payable. And when I got to accounts payable, it wasn't just about paying the bills. It was about understanding what I was paying and why we were paying it, the terms around it. Shortly after that, caught someone's attention and I shifted on to accounts receivable. And it wasn't just about sending out the bill. It was about who we were sending the bill to and making sure that the right products were on the bill, because customers would say, hey, no, I'm not paying that bill unless you get the bill right. So just learning through that process. And then my journey just kept going. And what I found that I really loved people and I was good at working with people and solving problems. And so as you can see now, still 20 something years later, I'm still in the business.
That's amazing. There's so many people that I've met along the way that started like in a secretary or executive assistant or receptionist role. And they found out a couple things, and it sounds like similar to your story, is that number one, I could do it well. I could connect with people, and it was more than just directing calls. And number two, kind of the interest in the people then made that relationship more valuable. And people said, I really like this person. All of a sudden, once we have a person who's curious, who has a growth mindset, and who wants to learn the business, well, at that point, hey, the world's your oyster, right? We can put you in any role. Yeah.
Absolutely. And those 3 points are the key points of what I said, right? And that's the advice we would give anyone. Always be curious.
Yeah.
Always show up at your best with the right mindset. And then the rest is that I tell people that I have the opportunity to share my story with, excellence will draw attention to you. Excellence will draw attention to you. You just go be you and the best version of you, and excellence will draw attention to you.
Yeah, there's that Steve Martin quote that I love, and it said, I might butcher it now, but something along the lines of, be so good that they cannot ignore you. And it's that same thing. If you are excellent on a long enough and generally short enough timeline, people will recognize it. I want to ask you specifically on growth mindset, and So this is in your email, and you have two things in your email that I absolutely love. But you have growth mindset. We cannot change what we have experienced, but we can choose how the experience changes us. Why is that so important that you're putting it on every single email that goes out?
It's a mindset. And I tell you, in the world that we live in, at the end of the day, dealing with the vicissitudes of life, it's a mindset that we have to have, right? Change is inevitable. It's going to happen. And depending upon what that change is, it may be perceived as good or bad. But either way, the mindset around the fact that, hey, I am going to play the hand that I was dealt to the best of my ability, right? And I'm not going to let my perception or the perception of how I am impacted by the change keep me from having the right mindset to move forward and give it my best.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm sure this is tied right in there. This is just a little bit further down on your email. It says, thanks and have a great day in all caps on purpose. What does that mean?
So the on purpose is intentional. So when you're thinking about the word intentionality, right?
Yeah.
That means that you're going to put forth the effort regardless. You get to control the outcome, right? So when I say have a good day on purpose, I literally am saying that whether the day is good or bad, you choose. Mm-hmm. This is your choice that you get to make. And so choose wisely and do so on purpose.
Yeah, I like that. I started this habit that I heard Jim Collins, the business guru, author of Good to Great, et cetera. He has been for years. He has a simple spreadsheet. At the end of every day, I think he tracks the number of creative hours he has in the day, maybe one other thing. And then he gives a scoring to the day. And it goes -2, -1, 0, +1, +2. I was like, that's interesting. I currently kind of track kind of mainly the people. You'll go in my book today. The people that I kind of talk to during the day. And I started doing that as well. When I found, been doing it maybe a year and a half, is early on, I almost never had a -2. And it's just kind of a gut feel, but I had many -1s and then I had some zeros. And now it's probably been, I don't know, a year, 6 months, 9 months, whatever. Like I really don't have bad days. Like a +1, and it would have to be something kind of really unique to even have a 0 or a -1. But again, I think to your point, it's just that mindset of, hey, we're in control here. And sometimes, yeah, bad things happen. Yet, what can I learn from it? What can I take? How can I build on it?
And you know what? It also it builds that a muscle in our mind and in our brains to think about the fact that the good outweighs the bad.
Yeah.
It builds that gratitude muscle, if you will, that at the end of the day, we're going to resolve to the fact of this was a good day, right? There's a quote, and now I may butcher it up. It talks about, was it a bad 5 minutes or was it 5 minutes that ruined the whole day, right? So, oftentimes we'll go through something and we'll let 5 minutes ruin the entire day. So was it a whole day or was it just 5 minutes that we let ruin the entire day? So the on purpose gets us into that mindset of pausing as things come up and choosing to see it in a different way, in a positive way, or in a way that's going to benefit us and stimulate our brains to overcome it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, we're going to transition a little bit into more HR specific things. There's a couple other things, but I would look down and we'd go through 45 minutes talking about your emails, which I love. I always try to, when we're talking to folks, I try to think about what they say, and then what would the opposite be? If we were to kind of invert the sentence, would that make sense as well? And this context comes up more with HR folks than anything else, because I often hear that this phrase, oh, we really value the people side of the business. And I've never met anyone anywhere who said, you know what we really don't value in our business? Our people. So there is no inverse of that. Lawanna, when you are looking internally, you're talking to folks externally, are there specific behaviors or best practices or the top 5 things that I look for that say, other than espoused values, what you say you are, that people are really important to you, here's how I know if they really are. Are there some core things that you look at that say, okay, regardless of the terminology they use, these people, they do value the people in their business?
Yeah, and you can start with culture, right? And culture is made up of norms and beliefs, and right? So the challenge with companies saying, hey, we have a great culture and we value people. If you look at an iceberg, right, that's typically the top of it, right? You have your values. We value people, right? And then the part with that we really have to pay attention to is what happened below the iceberg, right? That's what sunk the Titanic.
Yeah.
Those are actually the norms and the beliefs that are in the culture that are not necessarily visible. So for me personally, when I interact with companies and organizations, I like to go out and see the behaviors that exist and that manifest in the environment. And not only that, but the ones that are tolerated, right? Going back to what we can control. Because from a people manager standpoint, we set the expectation, but we also manage the expectations. And so in some cultures where it is really clear what the expectations are around treating people with respect and treating people with dignity and cultivating this environment and this climate that's inclusive, that's supportive for people to show up at their best, that will be evident through the behaviors, right? And so that's what I look for, just behaviors around, mostly from the people leaders, because when you have a diverse culture, you can have a little bit of everything, right? Because those are norms and beliefs of all of those individuals. But what should be more evident is what has been controlled in those environments by the people leaders, right?
Yeah.
Think about some of the companies that you interact with. So for myself, and I don't know if you're familiar with this restaurant, Chick-fil-A. So I'm almost certain that if you go to a Chick-fil-A, perhaps you may encounter someone who didn't choose to have a good day on purpose. However, what is consistent is that majority of the customer service feel that you're going to get is, it's my pleasure to serve you.
That's 100%. And I got a 14-year-old that apparently needs to go there daily to get at least 1,000 calories from there, for sure. Well, what you said there really jumped out at me is from a leadership standpoint, or what people tolerate. Like, what is tolerated in terms of behaviors? And it was kind of a funny example, but it was exactly what you're talking about. Recently, we were with a client and we went into a meeting, and it was there was different folks from different levels of the organization. And this guy comes in from the yard, sits down, and it's a mixed group. And he just dropped a well-timed, very loud F-bomb in the normal norms of communication. And I just kind of sat back a little bit. I was like, okay. And no one flinched. And what that told me was, okay, this is not new. This is not new behavior. And this sort of thing is tolerated, whether it's for everybody or this individual. And I didn't really bring it up and everything was fine. But I was like, okay, so this is something, coarse language in mixed company within a group of, executives and people from throughout the company. That's normal. That's okay here. And being an outsider, it's for me just to observe and say, okay, that's interesting. And as we're helping out on other issues, could this thing be more advantageous or disadvantageous for that? But it was one of those things that, okay, this is tolerated here.
Yeah, no, sure. When you think of it in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as we move more towards being intentional, we being this industry,
right,
more towards being intentional about diversity, equity, and inclusion, that's going to be incredibly important to get a handle around the cultures, right? Because now we're saying that we're going to be intentional about inviting other genders and ethnicity and race and age and all of that into our culture. Mm-hmm. And so while we cannot create one specific to each culture, finding that those common grounds, what it makes sense for a business, for everyone to show up and to thrive and to know that they can show up and to be themselves so that they can give 100% is going to be incredibly important for our industry and any company that is pursuing diversity, equity, and inclusion intentionally.
How explicit should companies be in identifying and documenting the key behaviors? Because on one hand, we find when there's miscommunication or there's challenges with any of our clients, first of it is let's sit in a room and let's document exactly what we're talking about. And let's not kind of fall into these edge cases or these really memorable experiences. Yet at some point, you would assume there's kind of this diminishing returns when, like, think of all the behaviors we go through every day. That list theoretically could be thousands long. So how explicit should companies be in identifying the behaviors that are either, yes, this is what we do as core values, consistent with those, or this is kind of on the not to-do list?
Yeah, I think it varies on the company, right? So when you are entering into diversity, equity, and inclusion space, the first thing is assess company readiness.
Okay.
Right. And so based on that assessment of company readiness, that's when you would define what that looks like for you. Many companies start at the setting standard of business conduct, right? And take all of their team through that. I know for us at US LBM, we are very clear on what our standards of business of conduct is. And everyone is to go through that training. And there's a lot of conversation around what that is versus what it is not. Even within some of our portfolio of companies and our divisions, I know a couple of presidents that I work with that has taken that even a step further to do exactly what you're saying. Let's just talk about what's acceptable and what is unacceptable behavior. And honestly, if someone outside looking in, they may say, oh, that's elementary. Do we really have to do that and say, this is unacceptable and name that and this is unacceptable? In this day and time, I think we do.
Yeah.
I think we do. I don't think it's a right or wrong. And I applaud any company that at the front on the on-site says, these are our standards like we do at US LBM. I applaud any company that follow that same standard because it is definitely incredibly important. And anything else that you do, meaning how do you continue to reinforce that? How do you continue to keep that in front of your associates and all those that are connected to you is also important. So for us, not only do we ask that all new hires go through that training, but every year and at different times in the year, we refresh that content.
Yeah. That idea of exposure versus adoption. And this idea that, you gotta reinvest, you gotta reinforce. And that's how you kind of change these mindsets and behaviors long-term. I want to ask you.
Here's what I'll tell you on that. I really do believe if there is a big enough why fueled with purpose, understanding, and clear communication, most people buy in with the right mindset. And that's the key. We have to have a big enough why, and we have to be able to communicate that, right? And if that's fueled with purpose, understanding, and clear communication, most people will buy in with the right mindset.
Yeah. Purpose, understanding, and clear communication. Those were the three?
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And we just kind of find myself repeating this all the time working with clients is that when we have an issue, most of the time it's not the big idea, it's kind of the fringe of it. And it's like, and I would say confusion is the enemy. How can we distill this down to where we can all look at it and we can all say it and be like, okay, there is no confusion here. This is very clear and consistent. Then behaviors are generally, it allows people to kind of opt in or say, you know what, maybe this isn't right for me. And that's okay too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So as we think about DEI, you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. I know this is not only a single podcast, this is a whole series of podcasts that could go on for a long time.
Right.
How, if someone is in our audience listening, they're saying, okay, the DEI, I'm hearing these letters more often. We're not really doing anything. We're not, as far as I know, we're treating people well. We're trying to be kind to one another. What might be just kind of a small, let's put it in a smaller box for folks that haven't really explored it, because I'm sure each one of those, diversity, equity, inclusion, you can go in deep on. What's an overarching kind of way that we should maybe think about it if you are not clued in more detail?
Great question. And I'm going to lead into that answer by saying, go into diversity, equity, and inclusion with this thought. Let's first and foremost uncomplicate it, right? To your point.
Yeah.
How do we uncomplicate this? How do we make it what it is versus what it is not, or what all of the school of thoughts may think about it? And what I would offer up, and something that we're doing at US LBM, is we're looking at it in three different ways: compliance, character, and commerce, right? Okay. So from a compliance standpoint, many companies do diversity, equity, and inclusion from a compliance standpoint. That's the check the box, right? Or that's the reactive approach in many ways, right? Someone files a complaint, someone files a lawsuit, and we have to react to defend a frivolous claim around harassment or discrimination and so forth. So while compliance is important because we talked about the standard of business conduct that we have to put in place, we have our handbook or guidebooks that put some framework around expectations of how you should show up at work and how you can thrive at work. That's the compliance piece. But moving from compliance to character, the character piece is around just the moral imperative, right? This is the right thing to do. And many companies take the position that they do DEI from a character standpoint. We are doing the right thing. We believe in diversity and inclusion because it is the right thing to do. But here is the golden piece, and that's the commerce, right? How do we move in and out of compliance and character to commerce where we are developing a diverse, skilled pipeline of individuals who can show up where there is diversity of representation to help fuel diversity of thought to where we can get innovation and we can prove our products, our services, and our solutions and have a healthy bottom line and a very healthy culture and thriving individuals as well. So it's a win-win on all aspects when you move from compliance character to doing it really well with regarding commerce.
This was, and I've talked to, we've done another episode or two where we either touched on this for a little bit, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes. Another one's where we kind of went all in. This framework of thinking in terms of compliance, character, doing the right thing, and then commerce, for me, just resonated so deeply because being a tall, skinny ginger, I'm also fluent in Spanish, and we work with some dealers who serve a Hispanic demographic and many Spanish speakers there. And often they will come in and they will see someone who's generally male, someone who's generally middle-aged, and someone who generally only speaks English. And there's the broad recognition that we are underserving these folks. And we've been working with a few for several years. And one of them called me and said, hey, I got a question for you. Would this qualify if we wanted to market it as diversity, equity, inclusion? And I said, let's take this a couple different ways. But to your point, I said, this is all about helping your customers, growing your business, solving more things, and making it easier for you to interact with people in the markets you serve. And that piece of commerce, I think, was just so powerful. And in a lot of cases, that's kind of left out of it. And I think that's missing from, I think, your why piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to give credit to, we have partnered with a consultant company who has helped us shape our mindset around that, right? So the compliance, character, and commerce. And much like you, when we heard that, it resonated with me because it's uncomplicated, right? It uncomplicates it. And the other thing that I will add is for many organizations not to see this as a program or an initiative. Some are entering this space because of it coming center stage over the last couple of years as a program or an initiative. This is a journey, right? And as part of this journey, we have to make sure that perfection does not get in the way of progress, right? That we make it part of the fabric and fully institutionalize it throughout every area of our operation. If we do that, then we move from activity to impact.
So Lawanna, I appreciate that. Added a lot of clarity to the diversity piece. Let's talk about equity for a moment. And what's a simplistic way we can think about that term equity?
Yeah, equity takes into account the fact that not everybody is starting at the same level, right? So, but if we give everyone the resources needed, success is in reach for all. So for example, one thought leader said it this way: it is not just about giving everyone a pair of shoes. It's about giving everyone a pair of shoes in their size to ensure success.
Yeah. I like that because I know there are often a lot of resources and people will say, oh, hey, we offer this, this, and this. And then I'll say, hey, well, what if this person doesn't speak English? Or what if this person has this? Or what if this person does this? And then it's like, well, yeah, that doesn't pertain to most people, right? And so it's like, yes, are we offering it and is good? Yes. But I think to your point, I like the analogy with the shoes is there's a big difference. If you give me a size 18 pair of shoes, I guess it's better than nothing. However, if you really want me to excel at my job, it's not going to be that helpful.
Right. And Brad, one more thought on that is as we move into inclusion with the lens of equity, it will help on the inclusion part, right? Because inclusion is the practice of ensuring that people feel a sense of belonging in the workplace. And that means that every associate, every employee, however you reference that, feels comfortable and supported by the organization when it comes to being their authentic selves. So they can show up, have the resources that they need to contribute at a high level.
Yeah. And we often talk about individual people and contributors is like, what are they amazing at? What makes them really, really unique? And it is not uncommon at all with folks in our industry when we'll be talking to people and then we'll be just digging deeper and just learning more about them that we will find they have this passion, something that they're amazing at and they love to do. And it could be a huge benefit to the company. And we are completely unaware of it. And we have been for years. And I think as you think about the diversity and the equity as you described it, is you're allowing these people to come and say, I know that this isn't my job, but I also love this. And it allows people, I think, to do what you were able to do, which is say, hey, you hired me for this, and, snap your fingers before too long. I've been influencing people for years and I'm in a leadership role now, but we got to provide the environment where people feel really comfortable sharing that.
Absolutely. You got it.
To go deeper on that, Lawanna, can you provide like an example where, hey, let me give you an example. As we think about equity, people coming in and we just provide this. Some people, this is either below their needs, and other people, hey, this is way above it, but we're not meeting where they are. Is there maybe a tangible example from the deal or business that you can say, this is what we're talking about in our day-to-day business in a certain situation with someone?
Yeah, let's explore a couple of them and see if it resonates with you. Let's start with recruiting, right? So when we go to market for recruiting for positions, let's say drivers, right? The perception of drivers could be perceived to be a male type position from a position standpoint. And so when we go to market to attract a diverse pool of candidates that could qualify for the job, how we position ourselves and position the job posting is incredibly important to make sure that everyone, regardless of gender, could apply for the job, right? So in some of our job postings, not necessarily at US LBM because we are already solving for this, but in some companies, if you Google any jobs, there's a weight requirement, right? And it may be some very high weight requirement, but yet there are plenty of women that could do well in the construction industry, but perhaps they are not applying because they see the weight requirement or the lifting requirement. Yeah. And while it may be relevant in some areas of our business, it's not in all.
No, I've seen this. As soon as you started talking, I was like, okay, no, this is what we were talking about. Is there was in a job description we were reviewing with a client, and they had need to be able to lift, it was like 75 pounds or something over their head. And I said, number one, I'm like, from a safety standpoint, how many people do you want lifting 75 pounds of anything over their head? And they all kind of looked around the room and they're like, I don't know why this is in here. And then we kind of had this further conversation about, well, half the dudes who are driving here, let alone any women, they're not able to do that.
Right.
So no, I love that.
And then also too, job application rates between men and women, women tend to apply for roles where they meet 100% of the criteria, whereas men will apply if they only just meet 60%. So that same language, while they made the weightlifting or some of the items that we list may be a restriction from you, it's just, it sets the female population up as a disadvantage because of some of the requirements that may be perceived to be only for men and not even relevant in many cases.
Yeah, that was really helpful. And I feel like we've hit the two. I feel like I got to ask too, what about inclusion? How can we think about inclusion in kind of a mindset of let's eliminate any sort of confusion from this?
So inclusion is more about making sure that we are eliminating barriers where we are able to have diverse representation in meetings and places where we're making decisions to where they are able to contribute and give additional thought that could potentially improve our product, services, and solution. So diversity, think of it this way. Diversity is being, a thought leader said this, let me say that so I don't take the credit for it, but one thought leader put it this way: diversity is being invited to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance when you get there. So for our industry, many would probably say we believe in diversity because they may have diversity within their organization. The question becomes, how inclusive are we, right? So when we look at, if I enter into your organization, perhaps if I walk around from the office, the yards, I may see some diversity. Would that be the same if I walked into some of your meeting spaces where the decisions are being made? And there's where the opportunity is to be more inclusive,
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm watching the time here. And again, you've been very generous with this. I'm wondering, as we think about innovation within HR and the couple of stellar companies that we work with, they have moved so far beyond treating HR as someone to make sure they're compliant, making sure they're checking the box, helping out in recruiting, kind of doing the stuff nobody else wants to do, as opposed to being a really strategic partner and full seat at the table next to finance and operations and sales and everything else. What sort of innovation or kind of best practices are really at the top of your mind now that maybe we haven't talked about?
Yeah, so from an HR standpoint, well, obviously infusing DEI expertise into all HR practices, right? While DEI is not just about HR, it is a big part.
Yes.
And it's becoming necessary for HR professionals to also be well trained on DEI strategies so that we can help lead others in that way to manage the people side of the business.
Yeah.
In addition to that, just how do we optimize some of the shared services models that we have, and how do we optimize some of the technology and all of the things that we have in this current state of where we lost connectivity, right? And so that is real top of mind for most HR professionals, at least the thought leadership groups that I'm a part of, is how do we deal with the unknown, and how do we connect and collaborate and get the best out of everyone where we have lost, again, the ability to connect the way we used to connect.
Yeah, it's fascinating in our industry. I think you go back a couple of years and you'd say, to what degree would we be able to have anyone in any role work remotely? And I think a lot of people would say, not in this business, not in construction. It's heavy things, it's moving people, it's going to projects. And yet we've been able to, so many companies have done that. And I think a lot of folks aren't really going to transition back. So that's been fascinating. How much is just kind of the personal and professional emotional toll of this? Never in a time has there been more ability to communicate online in certain ways. And yet there's drawbacks to that. And we're not able to see people face to face. How would an HR professional kind of think about where are the boundaries when it comes to kind of emotional health and mental health come in, knowing that we're not experts in anything, but if I'm working with you, Lawanna, and someone comes to me, I'm like, I ain't the guy. She's got to be a hell of a lot more prepared for that than I am. Where do those boundaries lie for most folks in kind of your thought leadership groups?
Yeah, and it goes back to your original questions, or what are some best practices that are top of mind? Yeah. And it's really first of all, how do we think about it? Mm-hmm. And then how do we equip people leaders to navigate through it?
Yeah.
And so for the example you gave, hey, if someone came to you, you may say, hey, yeah, let me get you to Lawanna, right? Or let me get you to someone that I feel that could be better served in helping you navigate through the state of mind you're in right now. So for HR professionals, really making sure that we rethink and reimagine how we support and equip and provide resources to our people leaders and even all of those that are connected with our organization as a whole. That's top of mind right now, right? So for example, equipping people leaders on how to think about leading with empathy, right? Leading with heart. And when I think about leading with heart, I literally look at it as an acrostic, right? The H is being able to hear the hard things, right? So when you're leading with heart, you're listening to hear the hard things. And I got this from one of my divisions, so I want to give them credit for that, but I repurpose it in this way. So it's leading with heart, hearing the hard things. That's leading with humility, right? The E is to empathize. And by empathizing, I mean meeting people where they are. The A is acknowledging. So after you have heard and connected with empathy, then acknowledge. You can then acknowledge in a caring way, in a way that you have a current state understanding of what's going on. And then that helps you to respond in a way that says, hey, I'm here maybe to think about this differently, right? You've just taught me how to think about this differently. You've just helped me learn, unlearn, and relearn about a process, about the culture, about a leadership style. And then the T in heart is really thanking them for showing up in that way and for being courageous enough to have the conversation. And that is a framework that is just so incredibly important for all leaders. I know when you say lead with heart, some specifically in the construction industry may say that's too soft.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's too soft. And so, but at the end of the day, top of our mind is really teaching and equipping people leaders on how to lead with heart, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Well, I am just for someone who struggles to remember the basics, and as something as important as I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling stressed, there's a lot of things that are coming at me, and then you're in front of me, Lawanna, and this happens, and my instinct is, and I feel my emotion, and my normal reaction would be to do this, to have something available where I say, all right, let's take a deep breath. What's my checklist here? All right. I want to hear with a little, and then I want to hear listening well. Do I have a little empathy? How can I, immediately separate what I was feeling from what I should be feeling right now? I think it's so hard to do. But it's these things. We're battling human nature, but they can be overcome, but it takes training.
Exactly. And then if you're equipped in that way, and if you follow some type of process to center yourself to be present in the moment, at that point, I feel sure that you're in this headspace now that you will remember some of the resources that are available. So most companies have employee assistance programs or life assistance programs or resources that they can point their team members to. And so, as you mentioned, oftentimes when we're busy and when we have competing priorities, those things don't automatically come up. It's just go call someone else.
Yeah.
But as leaders, when we are practicing this mindfulness and to be present in the moment and really seek to understand, then we leave space not only to hear, but also to provide in that moment. Oh, hey, Lawanna, have you thought about our life assistance program? Go to the break room. There's a flyer there, or let me see if I can find that number or that connection point for you.
Yeah. And that's, I think, for leaders and managers everywhere, it's that sort of training that everyone kind of like, I know it's compliance stuff I need to know. But these are the sorts of things that they need to be fresh, top of mind. Otherwise, it kind of becomes just kind of white noise. Like you go in the break room, you're there every day. Yeah, there's a sign there, there's a poster there, but I don't know. I haven't looked at it. It hasn't been relevant or important to me until it is. So that kind of need to stay for leaders to continually reinforce this and update them. I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Lawanna, I'm a book nerd, and I see behind you, you've got Tim Ferriss's Tools of Titans. So I got to ask you, as you think about your career, has there been any one book or books that really stood out, that really kind of helped shape your thinking, or maybe something recently that you've read that you said, this has really been helpful for either you or anyone on your team?
That is a loaded question for me because I read a lot of books.
Wonderful.
And anything that I am affiliated with. So I have this saying in most of the groups, and one group that I'm a part of, the saying is, in order to lead, you must read. Mm-hmm. So we read a lot of books.
Yeah.
How to Win and Influence People is a book that I read every year.
Okay.
The Art of War is a book that I read every year. And what both of those books do for me, and right now I can't quote the author, I apologize for that. But what both of those books do for me is it teaches me a mindset on how to deal with people, how to interact with people in a meaningful way, how to win and influence people. And then the Art of War is just from a strategic standpoint, how to navigate as a thought leader, as a person that from a change management standpoint, how do you navigate to execute on the end goal? And that's what the Art of War does for me. Tools of Titan is a book that I incredibly enjoy just because it's full of a bunch of thought leaders. And I love tapping into the brains of others who have been there, done that, and have a story to tell from it.
Yeah. Two quick thoughts on that is one is at Oklahoma State University in their construction management program, they have now included Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And so many young students, that are in their early 20s and about to enter the workforce have found that reading it together as a book club in their capstone course, they have gotten just incredible feedback because it was largely unknown to them, even though it came out, I guess 80, 90 years ago. And I've tried over the years a couple times to read through Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And I'm like, it's a book that I should read, but I couldn't grasp it. And then I stumbled across for like $5 at a Barnes & Noble's, one that was illustrated. And I flipped it open, and it was the one basically about concentrating your forces. And obviously it's about war and leading troops into battle, but just this idea about being focused and concentrating all your forces in one area. And it was at a moment that I was having probably very slow realization that I was fighting about 5 different battles, and my energy and my attention and my focus was far from focused and concentrated. And I realized, okay, at least in one of the parables or one of the messages from Sun Tzu, that made sense and immediately resonated. I said, okay, now this totally makes sense. Let's not fight a 2-front war or a 5-front war. Well, those are wonderful. And I would say, I don't think I've asked a lot of people this question. I don't think the art of war has ever come up. So that's good work right there.
It's my favorite. And honestly, I know that book can be intimidating, but I love it because because you think about it, it's about strategy on how to go to war.
Yes.
And going back to a question or something we talked about earlier, when you're doing something on purpose, that with that mindset, you are better aware in the moment, whether it's good or bad, on how to navigate through it with grace, with the know-how, right? And so that's what I think is so beautiful about that book. But then I have one more, and it's not my last but not least book.
Sure.
But I definitely want to mention that every year I read our company's book. It's called The Story of Us. And that book is about the story of US LBM. It was written by L.T. Gibson, which is the CEO of the company.
Sure. And
that book breaks down the heartbeat of the company. So everything that we talked about is also my why, in which I'm connected to US LBM, and why I give my all at 100% and believe in what we're doing to create this company based off of its people, right? Our intention is to create and cultivate a diverse workforce to where people can show up at their best. And our pillars are in there, people. And so I love that book, and you can get it on Amazon, I do believe. So
I didn't know if there was a bad question or a joke, if I could go in and grab it, because
you certainly can. And I want to say that the proceeds from the book is tied to our foundation.
Wow.
If you want to learn more about the company, that book, The Story of Us, is an incredible read, and will tell you about the culture of US LBM, which summarizes everything that we just talked about.
Yeah, I'm curious for two reasons. I've seen and met LT a couple different times, and I've always been impressed. So just on your company and your growth, and how we didn't even get all the acquisitions and how that affects HR, maybe some other day. But I'm more curious too on just from a template. And I think anytime you can say, welcome to the company, it's your first day here, here's a book. I think the title, obviously it works on multiple levels. This is about us, and it talks about our core values. It talks about our structure. It talks about how we do this here and why. I mean, you talk about, sure, people can always confuse some things, and obviously that's why we have management and leadership. But I think right off the bat, if we can say this much is true, and we've really invested the time to put it on paper, and we live it every day.
We control the narrative, right?
Yes.
You get to control, you get to control the narrative of your story.
Yeah.
There'll be many opinions about people and processes and things, but you are the author of you.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever it is that you own. So if that's a company, if that's a process, if that's a podcast, is whatever it is, you own it. And the opinions of others are the opinions of others, but you get to control the narrative because you're the owner of it.
No. Well, I love that. And I think that's a great place to end. And I will just say thank you. And a mutual acquaintance of ours said, if you do not know the name Lawanna Dendy, you need to know it. You got to talk to her. And if she's willing, you got to have her on the podcast because you will absolutely love it. And this person was 100% right. So I'm so glad he did. And I appreciate you making time.
And thank you for bringing that person up, because I know who that person is. And this goes back to the diversity, equity, and inclusion piece that's an example of it. And it's about inclusion, and it's about allyship, right? Mm-hmm. And for that individual to put my name in the hat, that's incredible. And you know who you are. And I say thank you to you for that.
And likewise, I do to that person and to you. So Lawanna, thanks for everything. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
As always, thank you for listening. I hope you found my conversation with Lawanna Dendy to be worth your time and attention. Now, our goal here is to make this the best podcast you listen to. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas for future shows, potential guests, or any sort of builder scenarios, customer situations you're dealing with that are driving you crazy and you're looking for additional help. I'd love to get involved, see if we can't use this podcast to help you and people who are in a very similar situation. And as most problems are largely around a few big issues, I'm sure whatever you're dealing with could benefit other people. So if you're interested, do not hesitate to email me directly at bradley@behindyourbacksales.com. Again, Bradley at behindyourbacksales.com. And of course, you can link up with me on LinkedIn and connect with me on Instagram at behindyourbackceo. So if you found this episode with Lawanna valuable, please share it with your network. And if you would, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Those mean more to us than you know. So as always, thanks for listening. We're going to close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, you are owed nothing. Deliver value first.